Hey, what's up everyone? In this video, we'll be talking about methods in Java. All right, so what is a method? A method is a block of instructions that represent a much larger action, okay? So to make a little bit more sense of this, we'll go ahead and take a look at an example. And if you've seen my other videos, you might be familiar with this person class I created earlier. Basically, it has three parts: the attributes, the constructor, and the methods. Now, in this video, we'll be focusing on only methods, so I didn't include any constructors or any attributes, okay? Now, for the methods, we have four methods here. 1, 2, 3, 4, okay? So let's go ahead and take a look at these examples. Now, before we get into the specifics on how to actually write and create a method, let's just go ahead and use one of these methods, okay? So let's go ahead and we'll go to this main.java class where we can create an instance of the person class, meaning here we'll create a person object, okay? And if you're not sure how to do this, make sure to watch my other video on creating objects, okay? All right, so here we have our person object, right? Okay, and when I type in person and then I press period, you'll see that all these options pop up, okay? And more importantly, these right here. So here you'll see the same methods inside of the person class. So there's one called say hello, there's another one called say favorite color, there's another one called provide favorite num, and then lastly there's one called add numbers. And so you could see that list here when you press period, they're all here, okay? So let's go ahead and choose the first one, which is say hello. Pick that one, and then we'll go ahead and run it, okay? And if we look at the console window, you'll see that it says hello, right? And if we go back to check out how the method was defined, that's exactly what it's supposed to do, right? We already know that system.out.println prints whatever string you have here onto the console window. So when we called this method, it basically ran everything that's inside of the body of the method, okay? So this one is pretty straightforward, right? All right, so if we go to the second example here, this one's called say favorite color. Now this one's a little different because it requires an input, okay? So as you can see here, if you want your method to require an input, you must specify the data type, and then you just come up with a variable name for whatever the input you want um, the person to include. So see how here I named my variable color? That's because I want the user to provide a color. But you could really call this whatever you want. Okay, this is just a variable name, and then you update it inside of the body of the method, okay? But I'm just going to change it back to color, okay? So that we know what we're talking about. All right, so let's go ahead and use this. But actually, before we do, just know that once we provide an input, it's going to print all of this onto the console window, right? But it's also going to include the string that was provided as the input. Okay, so this would say, hello, my favorite color is, and then the string that was provided. Okay, so let's go ahead and try that out. So we'll do person dot, what was it called? Say favorite color. Okay, so as you can see, it's complaining here because it wants you to provide a string. So my favorite color is blue. Okay. And if we run it, okay, we're going to get the response or the output, right, from the first one, from this line, okay? And then we're also going to get the new one from this line, from line 7, okay? So my favorite color is blue, and that's exactly what we see here, right? Okay, so that's how you basically use a method that requires an input, okay? All right, let's take a look at this third example here. So this is method with output. Now, something to note here is that this right here, this second part in the header, and we'll go over the details of method headers in just a second. But here, just note that the second part here in the header says int, right? Whereas before it said void, right? So void just means that it's not going to return anything, okay? But in this case, in this example, it'll return an int, okay? So we're letting the computer know that once we call this method, what will happen is that it'll return an int, okay? And more specifically, it'll return this 7 here that's been hard-coded on there. So let's go ahead and run that. So we'll do person dot provide favorite num, okay? And then once we run it, you'll see that we get hello. We get hello, my favorite color is blue, which is from line 7. But then for line 8, we don't get anything. Why is that? The reason for that is because we don't have a system.out.println statement here, okay? So it is technically returning a 7, okay? It is returning a 7, but it's not outputting it out to the console window, okay? Printing something to the console window does not mean that you're returning something, okay? Now check this out. Let's say we did want to print out that 7. What we would have to do is we would have to write system.out.println, okay? And then we would have to wrap this whole thing in parentheses, because as you can see, when this gets run, okay, this instruction here will return a 7, okay? But that 7 is just sort of floating out in the air, okay? And the application doesn't know what to do with that 7. But if you wrap it around using the system.out.println, it'll read that 7, and once you run it, you'll see that it now prints the number 7. Okay? So that is the example for methods with an output. Okay, just keep that in mind. All right, and then finally we have here our fourth example. This is a method with an input and an output. Okay, so if you understood the last two examples, this one should be pretty easy. Okay, so basically it requires two inputs, okay, more specifically two ints, so it requires two ints. So those two ints go inside of the method body, they're added together, and then they're simply returned. Okay, so let's say I provide 1 for this first input, and then I provide 2 for the second input. So 1 plus 2 equals 3, so it'll return the 3. Okay, so let's see that in action. Go ahead and do person dot add numbers. Okay, as you can see, it's requiring us to provide 2 inputs. So let's go ahead and add, let's do 7 and then comma and then 1. Okay, and if we run it, you'll see we get hello from that from line 6, Hello, my favorite color is blue from line 7, 7 from line 8, but we don't get anything from 9. Okay, so if you remember, the reason for that is because this is not printing anything to the console window. It's simply returning the number, but that number is just sort of floating around. Okay, if we want to print it out to the console window, we'll have to wrap it in system.out.println. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. And then once we run it, you'll see that it is now 8. Okay. All right, and just keep in mind that you can either do the system.out.println here, or you can just call it from within the method. It all just really depends on, what you're working on and what you want your solution to be like. Okay. All right, so now that we've gone over those 4 examples, let's go over the syntax on how to create a method. So you only really need 3 parts. If we look here in the header, okay, you'll see that there are 3 parts here. The first part is called the access modifier. Okay, and this could either be public, private, or protected. And basically what it means is that if you type in public, it means that other classes can call this method, which is exactly what we've been doing here, right? But if this was private, then we would not be able to do that, okay? Now, don't worry too much about access modifiers right now. I'll make a video on it shortly. So yeah, the first section is an access modifier. The second section here is what's called the return type. It can return something, okay? If you want, you can make it return a number, or you can make it return a string or anything like that. In this case, we're not returning anything, so it'll just be void, right? It's just printing something to the console window. It's not returning anything. Whereas in this third example, we did return something, right? Which is why I had to provide the keyword int, because I wanted it to return the number 7. Okay. And then this third section here is basically the name that you want to give your method. Now, I would highly recommend you give your method a name that's a verb. Okay. Verb or some kind of action. So if you look at all these examples, say hello, okay? Say favorite color, provide favorite num, add numbers. These are all actions. These are all verbs, okay? So always make sure to name your methods after verbs, okay? Not nouns. Your classes and objects should be nouns, and your methods should be verbs, okay? And this right here, the opening and closing curly brace, a lot of you might already know that that is the start and end of the method, okay? And anything in between is basically the instructions for the body of the method, okay? So once you call the method, everything that's between those 2 curly braces gets run. All right, so that is all for this video. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Thanks.